Meanwhile, tonight, the White House is now threatening to cut all federal funding to Harvard University. It comes after the Trump administration says the university failed to protect Jewish students from harassment.
The Trump administration tonight firing back at Harvard University after the school basically set up a showdown with the Trump administration, rejecting some of the White House's demands on its policies. A White House spokesperson saying, in part, President Trump wants to end unchecked anti-Semitism and that Harvard's response could put its federal funding at risk. But Harvard's president says the university will not surrender its independence and that neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government.
It's not every day that the White House takes on Harvard University, and it's even rarer to see billions of dollars in research money suddenly vanish in the middle of an academic year. But that's exactly what happened when President Donald Trump's administration announced it was cutting roughly $2.5 billion in federal research grants to the Ivy League giant, accusing the school of turning a blind eye, and in some cases even participating in anti-Semitic harassment on campus. The showdown didn't come quietly. In fact, it's unfolding in full public view, with cameras outside Boston's federal courthouse and legal teams on both sides warning of massive consequences.
Harvard attorneys are asking a federal judge to stop the Trump administration from withholding federal funds from the school. Harvard claims the government's freezing of research funds is illegal, but the government argues its contracts with Harvard state the government can terminate its grants if the school does not align with the government's priorities. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributor James Sample for more on that. So, James, what do you make of these arguments both sides are making?
Well, so Harvard is alleging that the administration is retaliating in an unconstitutional way in violation of Harvard's First Amendment rights to speech, to academic freedom. The administration is turning around, as you just said, and saying that this is a matter of simple executive discretion and contract law.
On one side, the Trump administration framing the move as a defense of Jewish students and a moral stand against what it calls the radical left takeover of universities. On the other, Harvard warning that the funding freeze could jeopardize cancer research, Parkinson's studies, and other critical medical breakthroughs. It's a fight that started brewing months ago. The clash was inevitable. Since the war in Gaza began, U.S. campuses have become a stage for outrage, grief, and, depending on where you stand, either activism or harassment. At Harvard, protests denouncing Israel's military campaign grew louder after October 7th, 2023. Students held rallies, occupied spaces, and pushed for the school to divest from companies tied to Israel. Some of those demonstrations were peaceful, some crossed into personal attacks, and a few openly praised groups like Hamas, a move that drew national condemnation. For Jewish and Israeli students, the atmosphere was tense, sometimes hostile. A federal task force found most felt discriminated against, and a quarter reported feeling physically unsafe. Harvard leadership didn't deny there was a problem. They called the harassment vicious and reprehensible, but they also refused the administration's sweeping list of demands, which included restructuring governance, ending certain academic programs, changing hiring and admissions practices to enforce ideological balance, and disbanding student groups accused of misconduct. To Harvard, those demands weren't about protecting students. They were about forcing the university to bend to political pressure, using anti-Semitism as the stated reason, but with a much larger goal: controlling what's taught, who's hired, and who's allowed to speak. When the school pushed back, the retaliation was fast and severe. Federal grants were frozen. Threats to bar international students followed. The tax rate on Harvard's $53 billion endowment was hiked. Even accreditation was put on the table. In court, Justice Department lawyer Michael Velchik summed up the administration's position with a soundbite designed to sting. Harvard prioritized campus protesters over cancer research.
The judge, Allison Burroughs, in the Federal District Court in Boston appeared very skeptical yesterday of the government's arguments, saying that she put it in this way, putting a question to the government's attorney: what is the relationship between fighting anti-Semitism and cutting off cancer research funds? That was a direct question put to the government. And her argument there is that everybody, including Harvard, wants to fight anti-Semitism, but cutting off research funding puts the university, and in this instance, Harvard is the exemplar, and potentially this could go to other universities as well, for an untenable either-or proposition. Either you comply with the administration's demands, or you cut off scientific, medical, and other research breakthroughs.
President Trump's posting about this on social media, calling the judge a total disaster, and saying that when she, quote, rules against us, we will immediately appeal and win. Has there been any indication over how the judge will rule here?
The only indication so far, well, I guess there are two. One, the judge in June issued a 44-page ruling on another matter involving Harvard, in which the administration was trying to prevent some of its international students from enrolling. And in that decision, she said, Judge Allison Burroughs, same judge, said that the administration was violating free speech. So that's one indication.
Harvard's lawyer, Stephen Lahotsky, countered that none of the research being defunded has any link to anti-Semitism, accusing the government of weaponizing funding to regulate the intellectual conditions on campus. Here's the quiet truth humming beneath the legal arguments. The protests that have rattled Harvard and other campuses didn't emerge from nowhere. They're a direct response to what's happening in Gaza, a war that has left entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, tens of thousands dead, and international agencies warning of famine and systemic human rights violations. For many students, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, this isn't abstract politics, it's a moral emergency. Their signs and chants, however confrontational, come from watching what they believe is the mass killing of civilians with little accountability. That's where the balance gets tricky. How do you protect Jewish students from anti-Semitic abuse while also protecting the right to condemn a military campaign that human rights groups, UN officials, and global courts have described as edging into, or already being, genocide? The Trump administration's answer has been to lean hard on the first goal, framing dissent as danger. Harvard's answer has been to try to hold space for both, and in the process, angering both sides. Judge Allison Burroughs, overseeing the case, pressed the government on its methods. How can it cancel grants across the board without proof that any of the research or researchers are connected to anti-Semitism? Where's the due process? She warned that the constitutional consequences could be staggering. But outside the courtroom, the fight has already spilled into the public arena. Trump has used Truth Social to brand Harvard anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, and anti-America, rallying his base with the image of an elite institution coddling radicals. Supporters see it as a long overdue reckoning for universities they believe are hostile to conservative voices. Critics see it as a warning shot, a demonstration that if you push back against the president's ideology, your funding, your independence, and your entire research infrastructure can be taken hostage. And Harvard isn't the only target. Columbia, Cornell, Northwestern, even the University of Virginia have all faced similar threats or funding cuts under this new, aggressive approach to policing campus politics. That's why this case matters far beyond Cambridge. If the administration wins here, it could set a precedent for federal power over academic life that no future university, red state or blue, will be able to ignore. For now, the frozen billions are a symbol of a government willing to wield financial power to reshape campus culture, of a university standing in defiance, and of a deeper, unresolved conflict over how America's institutions should respond to war, injustice, and the language we use to describe them. One side insists it's defending Jewish students. The other says it's defending free inquiry. But the protests that sparked it all are still going, and so is the war that made them necessary in the first place.